From the middle of April until early June, staggered over the course of several weeks, the world's biggest election will take place. More than 988 million registered Indians will go and vote. Of course, that the polls strongly suggest that Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP, will return to power for a third consecutive term. This is not the first time that we talk about India and war diplomacy, and it's not the first time that we have the conversation with today's guest. And it's my outermost pleasure to welcome you again, Shital. It's great that you're here, and we're recording face to face in Brussels, which is amazing. Lovely weather we have today. So, how are you?
We do indeed. Hi, Fabio. Thank you for having me on the podcast again, and especially talking about India during election season is very on theme, super important. Especially since I was talking to my parents today, and they just went and put in their votes because in India you do get a day off to go and vote since it's such a huge time of voting. It's about like 45 days.
Yes, that's I think one of the first things that came to my mind when this was on the news last couple of weeks, that it will take over a month for everyone in India to go vote, and I think that is that calls a lot about the size of this country. It's a subcontinent, and the huge importance it has on the world stage, and I think it's really appropriate that we put the focus again in India and talk about it. And just for our listeners, they can check the other episode we recorded on India. That one is mostly related to India's geopolitical maneuvering between different powers and how they've managed to struggle between the two forces, the West, the East, and how they drive their foreign policy in a really interesting manner. And that was a great conversation we had, Yoshi. So we're going to put those links in the description. So for today's topic, SJ, I think we're going to mostly focus on the role of Modi, like try to understand him as a leader and his idea for India, where he wants to take the country. And we're also going to have a little discussion regarding how we see India as, like some people say, the new China. I think there is potential, but a lot of challenges there to overcome as well.
Well, talking about Narendra Modi, I think is very important, especially since we've seen his rise of power since 2014. Modi was never been new to the public eye. He was the chief minister of Gujarat for multiple years before he stepped into the arena to become prime minister of India. And especially seeing that there was also a change in the political party that was in control, because we first had the National Congress, who has ruled and has had the major power since the independence of India in 1947. But Modi brought himself this new era of economic growth, this new era of digital development, and trying to see every Indian from the same perspective. His movement about cleaning India, making India bigger on the international stage, and I think it has really worked. Over the past decade, we have seen so much coming out of India, and Modi's name becoming almost synonymous as Gandhi when you talk about India. He's a leader that has been in the public eye under the public scrutiny, but still is the most populist leader of our current generation.
And according to certain polls, his approval rate is 78%. I mean, that is a lot in such a big country such as India, right? He's a charismatic and masterful orator in Hindi. And I think that he's perceived as this hard worker, committed politician, not likely to run to nepotism or corruption. He's 73 years old, so he's also in that club of the elders, world leaders we're having lately. And he has no children, although he's married, you told me, right?
Yeah, he is, but obviously that's never been in the picture in his political career. But Modi, you see, came into power when India was really struggling with political corruption, with the richer getting richer, and all this black money, what we state is like illegal money that was being hid in India. So his 2016 role of demonetizing the currency and then producing new Indian currency is kind of what showed that he was someone who was economically serious and someone who really wanted to make changes. And we have seen these changes. His control over the borders have been really appreciated by the population of India, especially since we share borders with two nuclear states like Pakistan and China. it has been especially important. And like you said, his use of the language Hindi is very unifying. Whenever he's abroad, whenever he's making speeches, he always speaks in Hindi, which is one of the national languages of India, and he uses it as a soft power for the Indian diaspora, not just in India but abroad, because people come out to see him, people want to hear him speak.
And not just the language, but the way Modi presents himself, with those traditional clothing. I don't know what's the name of that, the traditional one he wears all the time, but I think that he really wants to show like that ethnic authenticity of his persona, and I feel like he's giving projecting an image of a powerful, muscular pride nation, and I think a lot of Indians are buying that, that proposal, and I think it's one of those keys to his success, right? So, Shital, I just wanted to ask you a little bit if you could give us a general overview. Where did Modi came from and his career in like general words? How could you describe his ascent to power?
So his ascent to power has been gradual, you can say, because back in 2014, when he came into power, it wasn't controversial. It was like a moment of joy that they were coming out of the other prime minister, Manmohan Singh, who had also been the prime minister for over a decade. And since India does not have a set number of terms that somebody can run as prime minister, we see Modi back at the voting to gain voters for his third term. So India's, I don't know if you know this, but India has the same voting system as Westminster, where we adapted from the British, where you have the lower house of the parliament and the upper house of the parliament. And right now we see from April through June that it's the lower house of the parliament, the general elections, where BJP, Bharatiya Janata Party, which is Modi's party, needs a stronghold to be able to continue their current success and to keep their momentum going. So, as you see, Modi started as the chief minister of Gujarat, and he built his power through the political party by being the leader of the party and then forming other alliances with other political parties. Because, as you know, India is a multi party system with over 2,600 registered political parties. And in the current voting of 2024, we have over 15 million poll workers just working to take votes from the Indian population. While Modi's success has been immense, we also see some of his faults, which has kind of led to domestic issues with speech, freedom of press, with rallies, of the way people criticize that most independent authorities in India are becoming less independent.
Shital, I think that really talks about these authoritarian tendencies that are huge criticism that go against Modi's rule. I've read some articles lately how he has centralized power. He has pretty much built a cult of personality, right? While at the same time weakening India's system of federalism, right? So Hindu majority has clearly become the dominant factor here, and key pillars of the democracy, just what you said, free press, independent judiciary, have been eroding a little bit, right? But still, Modi wins democratically. I remember there was this study about democracies in the world, and India was put in the level of hybrid democracies, which is democracies with flaws. So, but at the same time, I mean, it is true that it's not a rigged election. I mean, he does win. It's true that there are certain factors that maybe it's not the fairest of the games, but he does manage to win in the polls. So another interesting thing to mention is that nearly half of India is under 25, or at least from the people that will go and vote. And many of these young Indians are looking to assert their cultural and maybe social vision of where India stands in the world. And I think that Modi has really managed to make them see how his idea of India is gaining power in those young populations, right? So what do you think, Shital, that the youth in India is really supporting Modi and his agenda, if at the same time there has been this erosion in the democratic system of India?
So, what I believe is that Modi has been working on this persona and this presence of leadership that India so much needed. Him culturally and also politically creating all these facets in India when you're not just talking about digital innovation, but you're also talking about India's presence in the G20, you're talking about India's presence with the BRICS, you're talking about how India has been looking more and more towards its own region, looking to their neighboring Asian partners, rather than this old idea we had of looking towards the West, which I believe comes from colonization. And then Modi has also been able to manage this balance of keeping Western powers and Eastern powers at bay, because India as a country is huge and populous and with so many different views and opinions and agendas, but he has somehow managed to walk the line without too much disturbance.
Yes, and I think that is the key point of the conversation we had last year. You know that the way that Modi and India has managed to move around big powers gives them the freedom, you know, to say, well, I can join the BRICS in here, but at the same time, I can join these Western alliances in the Pacific, you know, to counter China, but at the same time, I'm part of the non-aligned group of countries. So this way, India has managed to you could say play. I don't want to say play both sides, but maybe put an egg in all the baskets that are around,
Very
and
true.
that can help you a bit in order to when you want to leverage or when you want to win something in a negotiation, right? Especially now with the different geopolitical struggles and clashes we've seen in Ukraine, in Gaza. I mean, India at the end, all powers want to get India in their side, and that is a really interesting coin to play. And what you said, I agree. I think that 2023 was clearly India's year. I mean, not just the presidency of the G20, but they also went to the moon. They became the fifth economy, surpassing the UK, which, as you've said, is the colonial power of India. So I think that has a really potential message there. And they also became the most populated country in the world. So those are really
Yeah.
positive points that I think that Modi will play and has been playing in his campaign to win the elections this year. And I think a lot of people are supporting that. I think when a leader puts your country in the world stage to that level, especially if it's a country that unfortunately went through colonization in the past centuries, your population can be really proud of it.
Yeah, it is very true. Also, since we were talking about how he balances the scales, I think it's important to talk about how his international issues and his domestic issues also need to be balanced, because if he pays more attention to international issues and focuses on the Indian diaspora abroad, he loses this voter base and his own public who will not be supporting him as a leader. But at the same time, if he puts a lot of domestic agendas in front of all of the international agendas, he fears the risk of losing the international foothold that India has enjoyed over the past several years. And now, like, even Modi was awarded the Medal of Legion by Emmanuel Macron. So you see that his public image plays a lot into his soft power and him trying to appeal to his voters and trying to appeal to his country of the policies that he wants to put forward.
So we can say that Modi wants India to be one of those global powers. I think that's clear, and I think Shital, that the key discussion we can have in this coming block is exactly that. Do you think that India is that superpower to come? So let's get at it. In this second block, maybe we can focus a little bit more on the idea if we believe India could become the next superpower and the next factory of the world, the manufacturer power where the world's biggest companies try to put their companies because it could be cheaper, it could be strategically well positioned. So as we previously said in the first block how 2023 was a huge year, a successful year for India. And being the president of the G20 was definitely one of those key points. So if we could maybe trace back the time into that huge forum.
So I think one of the things that the COVID-19 pandemic showed was the world's dependence on the supply chains in China, which has kind of made countries look at its neighbors like India and Bangladesh to move their manufacturing. So last year was a big year for India because they were the president of the G20 summit, like you said. But by being the president of the G20 summit comes with some kind of special powers where you can invite countries that are not part of the G20 to be a part of the summit. And one of the things that Modi really displayed during the G20 summit was the role of diversity and culture by hosting different G20 events in different parts of India to show not only the world leaders but his domestic population of the things, of the outcomes, of the achievements that these countries can make together. Now, India last year invited Bangladesh, UAE, Singapore, and the leader of the African Union. But at the same time, we see that the two members of the G20, Russia and China, were not present, which made a lot of people think that G20 would not achieve the goals that they set to achieve. But I think one of the biggest achievements from the G20 was the digital infrastructure, the digital public infrastructure, the DPI, which multiple countries have, but under the One Future Alliance of the G20 goals, the countries would share their digital public infrastructure to build on their technology, and with the African Union to increase chances of investment opportunities both for India and for the African Union. So, hence, G20 and 2023 in all was a really big event and a really show of power, not only for Modi but also for India, that it is capable of being a leader in the context of the world when you have leaders coming from France, US, the UK, Australia. Like, these are some of the key allies of India, but at the same time, India also was able to create a lot of presence with the ASEAN countries, with their eastern neighbors. When you talk about context of India versus China, I think since we share borders with such countries like Pakistan and China, which are allies, and all three of us are nuclear powered countries, it is very difficult as a leader to kind of navigate those challenges, especially when you're trying to take economic, um, I wouldn't say benefits, but like economic opportunities away from China. It creates a rhetoric where China kind of does not see India in the same light the world does. And so we've also seen reports of China producing maps where states of India, like the Aksai Chin region and Arunachal Pradesh, are part of China's maps, which they have published officially, which kind of creates this tension between India and China as well. But I think India has a long way to go before it is competing fully with the level China is. But also, since India is a democracy and China is not a democracy, it also plays very differently, where you have to appease your citizens versus you're making authoritative decisions.
And it also brings me back to Xi Jinping's visit to Tibet not so long ago as well. To one of another reminder of those border disputes and regions between China and India,
Absolutely.
and another callback to that episode we recorded, because we did focus on the Kashmir region, and we talked about why it's so important and one of the most hot geopolitical tense regions in the world. So definitely a recommendation for listeners to go at it. And now that we're talking about China, it is true that this rivalry, it's not just political and military, but also economic. And it's true that China experienced a great 40 years of economic development, and that was a very specific type of miracle, but maybe it's a bit unlikely to be exactly replicated the same. But despite of that, India has undertaken major national rejuvenation project and state building under Modi. This economic potential has gained attention in the last years, and we're talking about infrastructure. We talk about roads, ports, airports, railways, energy, telecommunication that has transformed the country. And it's more than 34,000 miles of national highways that have been constructed since 2014 alone. So clearly, Modi wants India's lack of infrastructure not to be a challenge in order for this incoming investments to stay in the country, as maybe a lot of capital will try to start leaving China as it's becoming a bit more expensive to produce in there, because of course we know the middle income trap might not benefit the Chinese factories no longer, and maybe due to the fact that it's not that far away from China, it's still in Asia. There's a lot of highly educated people with technical diplomas in technological related topics, and at the same time, a lot of population in India speak English. It could be the great place for these companies to set up their HQs. So, how do you see this economic potential of India, Shital? Do you think that that's really going to be the key to allow Modi to make India this superpower, this so-called superpower, or do you think that there's still a lot of things missing in this equation?
I mean, in terms of competing with countries internationally, I believe that India's economic might would compete with somewhat of China's. But at the same time, when you talk about a superpower or a world leader, you are not just basing it on economics. You also want to talk about if they're supporting climate change, if they have sustainable growth, if there's child labor, or if there are issues that are so important to the average individual living in a country. And I do believe that we have a big push to go, a lot of changes to be made for us to be considered a global power. And speaking of China, China has its Belt and Road Initiative, which we have seen expanding over the last few years. And now we also have the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, where they're trying to increase railway and waterways between India, the Middle East, and then onwards towards Europe. And I believe, like, currently there are much hindrances with the ongoing conflicts, but we see that what China can do, other countries can also do, and they have the ability to keep competing with China.
Yes, I agree, but at the same time, Shital, going into more of those obstacles, I think one clear one is all of those inner, because you've said that it's true, in order to project your power abroad, you also need to consolidate power in house. And I think that at least maybe politically, Modi has done a pretty good job at it. I think that there's no clear rival opposition that could take power from him. I think that this election will definitely grant him this third consecutive term. But at the same time, there's still certain circumstances inside India that might create some tension and might defer certain resources there, right? And I'm thinking about ethnic clashes. I'm thinking about the huge gap between the richest and the poorest. I think the caste system is still something that's dragging a lot of people behind. So if India wants to make the best out of this opportunity, the government does need to put an emphasis on that. And if a huge chunk of the population is still not economically active and helping in that agenda, it might become a bit harder to actually deliver, right? So I think that potential is there. I mean, we're talking about a subcontinent. We're talking about a lot of individuals, young, most of them with really high level education, that want to be in the global stage with a strong, charismatic populist leader in the role. So I think that India is definitely in that trajectory. We cannot predict the future, how things will actually develop, but definitely the tendency is there. And Shital, talking about tendencies, I would like to ask you, as a way to start concluding this really nice conversation, is there anything that you believe is interesting for us to have our eyes open, to be alert? Where do you think India might go? And if there's anything you think is interesting for us to have in mind?
So I was having a conversation with some of my friends from India, and I think one of the more important topics we were discussing about was how Modi was able to impress the population, which started with militaristic activities, because one of our major issues has always been this issues with terrorism, especially when it comes to our borders, and especially when it comes to attacks. Looking at the 2008 Mumbai attack, which was like right in my backyard, you can say, like I was 8 years old. Like, all of this is really, really impactful. So this is the same generation that now has the rights to vote. Since terrorism was one of the biggest issues we've always had, I think the generation who has seen these impact on the country is now of voting eligibility. That's why the youth of India take so much interest in political activities. They want to be registered to vote, since in India it is not compulsory to vote. India is being involved, and Modi has been providing opportunities not just in India but also abroad, with things like scholarship with countries like Japan. And hence we also talk about like domestic stuff with like reservation or the quota system, where college institutions have a certain amount of quota for smaller minorities and ethnic groups, so that they are never left out, which has been going on for decades. It's not something Modi has created, but it is something that still continues.
So yeah, Shital, I think clearly the strategies are there. I think Modi really wants to balance the scales, give those people that don't have the opportunity to go and study. I think he's aware of it, but as we've said along this episode, there are still huge structural challenges still to overcome. And it's not the best geopolitical situation that India is facing, but it could be an opportunity, definitely.
Absolutely.
So, Shital, just as a way to finish and wrap up this episode, do you think that Modi will be able to deliver in a short, maybe medium term, this whole idea of making India a superpower? What are your thoughts on that?
I think India does have the potential, and the people have the potential to put India on the world stage where we can be one of the superpowers. But at the same time, the more you rise, the more challenges there are to solve when it comes to creating opportunities for other minorities, for about education, about retaining the youth in India, about job opportunities while in India. And with all of this, I don't know, maybe 5 years won't be enough for Modi. Maybe he might mold a successor to take his place as prime minister after the next 5 years, to continue with his policies and his agenda of taking India to the top. It might not be him at the helm of the boat at the end, but it would be in his image, is what I would say.
And with that, Shital, I think that we've covered most of the things we wanted to discuss. I mean, of course, this is a topic that would take us hours to properly examine. But I think we did an interesting way to drag this thread since who is Modi, where does he come from, to where he wants to take the country. And definitely the elections will come up maybe just a little bit after this episode is released. So a really interesting thing to have in mind, and hopefully your listeners find it interesting. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and you'll have the links to other episodes, including the one we talked about India's geopolitical maneuvering, in the description of the podcast. And thanks for tuning in. See you in the next one.
Thank you so much for having me, Fabio.